I am Carlos Alberto, the thinker. Welcome to the journey. 19 nations across the Americas are already participating in a new regional initiative to combat organized crime and drug trafficking. It has come to be known as the Shield of the Americas. To some, it represents a necessary response to a scourge that long ago ceased to respect borders. To others, it represents something very different. The risk that, under the banner of security, a major power might once again expand its influence over the rest of the continent. Who is right? We live in an era where almost all major events reach us accompanied by a narrative. One source tells us we are witnessing extraordinary regional cooperation. Another warns us that we are facing a dangerous subordination. For one side, it may be great news. For the other, the very same event may pose a danger. And the greater the political polarization, the harder it becomes to distinguish the fact itself from its interpretation. That is why, today, we will do something different. In our previous meeting, we sought out common ground among the nations of the Americas. We analyzed the constitutions of the 35 independent states of the Americas. Amidst that diversity, we discovered something very interesting. We found many points of convergence, principles that appear time and again, despite varying formulations and distinct historical paths. Sovereignty, liberty, rights, legality, representation, limits on the exercise of power, security, justice, well-being, progress. Then we looked beyond the constitutions. We turned to documents drafted by inter-American institutions themselves. And there we found them again: sovereignty, representative democracy, fundamental rights, separation of powers, cooperation, peace, development, participation. The commonalities were there. So we formulated a hypothesis. If the peoples of the Americas share a common family of principles, could those shared values serve as the foundation for greater cooperation? Could they ultimately underpin a pact? And could that pact be protected by something called the Great Shield of the Americas? At the end of that first meeting, we made a commitment not to fall in love with our own idea. We said that in this second chapter, we would put our proposal to the test. The moment has arrived, and to do so, we will once again use our thought laboratory. Today, two sides will confront our proposal, two adversaries, because that way we can test its coherence and its strength. Let us begin then. Imagine that standing before us is someone who views the current reality of the Americas from the perspective of those who defend the existing shield of the Americas. We will give them the floor, and we will not attempt to soften their argument. I would say something like this: you speak of sovereignty, while organized crime advances. Fair enough, the cartels possess weapons, money, technology, international routes, the capacity to corrupt, the capacity to intimidate, the capacity to control territory. Drug trafficking does not wait for political ideologies or philosophers to reach a consensus. It simply acts. It crosses borders, disregarding sovereignty. It launders money. It infiltrates institutions. It buys off people. And when a state tries to confront it alone, it often discovers it is fighting an organization that operates simultaneously in several countries. Therefore, cooperation is not merely an elegant diplomatic option. It is a necessity. If crime operates as an international network, states must also operate as a protective network. Sharing intelligence, monitoring routes, tracking money, cooperating on judicial matters, coordinating security forces, and, when necessary, utilizing military capabilities for targeted actions. Or does sovereignty consist of allowing criminal organizations to become more powerful than the state itself? What sovereignty does a nation possess if it does not control its territory? What freedom does a citizen have living under the dominion of a cartel? What rule of law exists when judges, police officers, officials, or politicians can be bought or assassinated? Organized crime threatens more than just security. It threatens the very principles you claim to want to protect. That is why the shield does not necessarily contradict those principles. It can actually be a tool to defend them. And if a nation possesses greater resources, intelligence, technology, and military capacity to help, why reject that help simply because that nation is powerful? The United States is also an American nation. Its power would translate into security for the other nations in the region. Let us judge by results, not by fears. The more countries that participate, the better. More information, more territory covered, more routes monitored, more cooperation, greater capacity. If the enemy operates internationally, the response must do the same. So much for the first argument. It is a strong one, and rightly so. But now, let us switch perspectives. Let us set aside that flag and put on the adversaries. Our second participant listens to all of the above and responds. It sounds perfectly reasonable, perhaps too reasonable, because whenever a concentration of power seeks to expand, it finds a reason to do so, and few reasons are as powerful as security. We are told we must hand over greater capabilities because a threat exists. We are told we must accept military cooperation because a threat exists. We are told we must allow joint operations because a threat exists. And who defines the threat? Who determines which organization is criminal? Who decides where cooperation ends and intervention begins? Who controls the controller? You speak of drug trafficking. We want to combat it too, but Latin America knows all too well what happens when major powers turn their own interests into continental policies. The United States is not simply another participant. It possesses economic, military, technological, and political capacity incomparably superior to that of most of its partners. So, we are not bringing equals to the table. There is a massive asymmetry. And asymmetries breed influence. Today, the target might be drug trafficking. Tomorrow, it could be something else. An inconvenient government, a trade relationship with China, an energy decision, a strategic resource, a different foreign policy. What happens then? Who protects our sovereignty against the shield itself? You say you want to prevent criminal organizations from dictating terms to our governments. Fair enough. We ask, who guarantees that a foreign power won't dictate terms to them either? Sovereignty cannot be defended by surrendering it. History, too, has a memory, and the Americas hold too many examples of interventions carried out under grand justifications. So, be careful. A shield can protect, but it can also become a structure of control. It depends on who holds it. It depends on who decides. It depends on who wields the power. That concludes the second argument. It is a strong one too, and rightly so. Now, our proposition is backed into a corner. On one hand, without cooperation, transnational crime can exploit the fragmentation of states. On the other, without limits, cooperation dominated by the most powerful actor can turn into a new form of dependency. Security, sovereignty, therein lies the contradiction. Must we choose one and sacrifice the other? Stoic geopolitics suggests we not rush, for when two narratives clash, our task is not necessarily to choose the one we prefer. It is to seek the facts that lie beneath them both, and the first fact is simple. Organized crime is real. It belongs neither to the right nor to the left. Nor do its victims ask which party a bullet belongs to. Drug trafficking exploits governments of various leanings, diverse economies, different roads, and varied societies. When it finds an opportunity, it seizes it. Therefore, the need for cooperation is also real. But there is a second fact. Power is real too, and international cooperation does not erase power imbalances among participants. The United States will remain far more powerful than many countries on the continent, even if everyone sits at the same table. To deny this would be absurd. So, perhaps both positions are pointing to genuine problems. Crime requires limits, and so does power. This is where our family of principles begins to show its utility. For the common ground we found included more than just security. It included sovereignty. It included more than just authority. It included limits on power. It included more than just the state. It included the representation of the people. It included more than just cooperation. It included legality. So, what happens if, instead of pitting one principle against the other, we use them together? Security with sovereignty, cooperation with legality, power with checks and balances, participation with representation. That is where it begins to emerge a different possibility. Not the disappearance of the shield, its evolution, because the current shield of the Americas did not appear out of nowhere either. Continental cooperation against drugs, organized crime, and money laundering has a track record spanning decades. There were treaties, boundaries, bilateral agreements, multilateral mechanisms, policies that worked, policies that did not work, and results that compelled a search for new answers. Reality changed. The mechanisms shifted once more. That constitutes a realignment. Now, 19 countries are participating in a new formulation. What might happen next? Here lies our opportunity. We need not destroy something in its infancy simply because it is imperfect, nor must we accept that it remain forever as it began. We can observe its evolution, and there an idea emerges that deserves to be put to the test. What would happen if more countries participated? Let us pause here, for expansion does not simply mean adding flags to a photograph. Brazil would contribute more than just territory. Mexico would contribute more than just population. Canada would contribute more than just economic weight. Each new participant would introduce its own interests, concerns, conditions, experiences, limits, and the principles it wishes to preserve. This means that expansion could increase the shield's capacity, but it could also increase the counterweights acting upon it. And this distinction is fundamental. The more legitimate interests involved, the harder it becomes for a single interest to automatically represent the whole. The more voices there are, the greater the need to build mechanisms to hear them. The greater the participation, the greater the need for regulation. That does not necessarily weaken the system, it can strengthen it. Democracies understand this principle perfectly. We do not seek the disappearance of executive power. We need it, but there is a legislative branch. There is a judicial branch. There are defined powers, checks, limits, responsibilities, checks and balances. Not because everyone is an enemy, but because everyone is part of the system. Why should an American construct ignore an experience that our own societies deem fundamental? We need not eliminate US power. That would make no sense either. The United States is part of the Americas. Its power is too. What we need is for that power to coexist with other powers, other interests, and other forms of representation within accepted rules. The exact same applies to Brazil, Mexico, Canada, Argentina, or any other country that might gain significant influence. The problem is not power itself. The problem is the lack of regulation surrounding it. And this is where the participation of the people comes in, not through some impossible continental plebiscite. History rarely asks millions of people beforehand exactly which institution they wish to build. Necessity tends to reveal itself through the act of seeking. People demand security, sovereignty, prosperity, freedom, opportunities, representation. Governments respond, institutions change, mechanisms evolve. And then the results are judged once again by society. The path is forged by walking it. That is why participation has another consequence. It raises awareness. When a society participates in a shared endeavor, it begins to ask itself, what are we defending? Why? What do we share? What do we not want to lose? How far are we willing to cooperate? Where do we draw the line? And then, principles written in a constitution can begin to become principles lived out in reality. Perhaps therein lies an opportunity far greater than the problem that gave rise to the current shield. The current realignment began with security, but its evolution could lead us toward a much deeper discussion about what the Americas wish to preserve, and we do not have to invent it. We have already sought it out. That was precisely the work of the first chapter. We discovered the family of principles. Now we are asking if they can move forward together, if they can survive conflict, if they can withstand divergent interests, if they can prevent the concern for security from destroying sovereignty, and prevent the concern for sovereignty from stopping us from cooperating against real threats. This is where our proposal begins to break free from the ropes, not because we have defeated one of the adversaries, but because both helped us improve it. The defender of the current shield reminded us of something. Without capacity, principles can become impotent declarations. The critic reminded us of something equally important. Without limits, capacity can end up threatening what it sought to protect. So, we need both capacity and regulation, protection and checks and balances, cooperation and sovereignty. We are facing what we have defined as a virtuous realignment. It does not eliminate the struggle of opposites. It depolarizes it. It allows different forces to check and correct one another, and when they find sufficient common ground, to build something new. Finally, dear friends, our proposal has just undergone a very tough initial test, and the result may be more significant than we imagined. For after hearing both sides, we discovered that the disagreement does not necessarily lie in the need to protect ourselves, nor does it necessarily lie in the need to cooperate. Those who observe the advance of organized crime call for cooperation to boost our response capacity. Those who observe the danger of excessive concentration of power call for sovereignty, limits, and safeguards. Both sides agree, or so they state, on the need to combat organized crime. We thus find a fundamental point of agreement alongside a fear of potentially losing sovereignty in the face of immense power. So, perhaps the real obstacle is not deciding whether we should cooperate. The far more difficult question is, how do we cooperate without allowing power to end up dominating the very thing we sought to protect? And this is where our proposal gains a different kind of strength. Because to control power, we need rules. But who creates those rules? Those who participate. This may well be one of the fundamental points of our entire analysis. The primary way to influence power is to participate in shaping the rules that will govern it. There is no guarantee that our position will prevail. Participating does not mean calling the shots, nor does participating mean that differences will vanish. It means something far more fundamental, being there when the rules are being drafted. Because if we do not participate, others will. If we do not put forward our interests, others will put forward theirs. If we do not defend the principles we deem fundamental, others will set the priorities. and once the rules are in place, we may find ourselves living with decisions in the making of which we never sought to participate. This is of even greater importance for small countries. A major power possesses multiple tools to defend its interests: economic capacity, military might, technology, markets, political influence. A small country has fewer tools at its disposal. That is perhaps why one of its greatest opportunities to play a leading role lies precisely in participation. Participating, negotiating, forming alliances, introducing one's interests, demanding representation, establishing rules, and seeking checks and balances alongside other participants. Thus, the expansion of the Shield takes on a much deeper significance. It is not simply a matter of adding countries to make it more powerful. It is about adding participants to make it more representative. More voices can mean more interests. More interests require better rules. Better rules require oversight mechanisms. And those mechanisms can generate greater checks and balances. Here, our family of principles once again takes center stage. In our first chapter, we sought out the foundations. We analyzed the constitutions of the 35 independent states of the Americas. We also examined documents drafted by the inter-American institutions themselves, and we found common ground: a family of principles. We therefore have a potential reference point to guide that participation: sovereignty, liberty, legality, representation, rights, security, justice, limits on power, progress, well-being. We do not have to build everything by tomorrow. In all likelihood, we could not do so anyway. Great human constructs do not appear fully formed. They are refined, they are expanded, they learn from their mistakes, they incorporate new experiences. They create new rules when previous ones prove insufficient. That, too, is part of a virtuous realignment. Given the significant historical moment the region is experiencing, Stoic geopolitics suggests that we foster the participation of the peoples in safeguarding and strengthening their principles, jointly creating the regulations necessary for their effective functioning. Only then can we properly speak of a great shield of the Americas. Participating to help shape its evolution, participating to broaden its objectives, participating to introduce our principles, participating to defend our sovereignty, participate to combat common threats, participate to build counterweights, and participate so that what begins today as cooperation against organized crime may evolve, results permitting, into a structure that increasingly represents the peoples of the Americas. If we do not participate along the way, we will hardly be able to decide on the destination. And here, the pendulum of history seems to be pointing us toward an opportunity once again. The Shield is already underway. The question is not merely who took the first step. The question is who will be willing to walk and help build the path. The more walkers who participate, the more experiences can be incorporated, the more interests can be represented, the more voices can demand boundaries, the harder it will be for a single voice to claim to speak for everyone, and the better our chances that this construction evolves around what our research has already uncovered: an American family based on principles. That is why, after putting our proposal to the test, Stoic geopolitics can indeed point to an opportunity, not a guarantee, an opportunity to participate actively, not to accept everything that already exists, but precisely to improve it, not to subordinate ourselves to power, but precisely to participate in creating the mechanisms designed to regulate it, not to eliminate our differences, but to ensure our differences are represented as well. And this applies especially to the smaller nations and countries of the Americas. Turning one's back will not necessarily halt a process of construction that has already begun. Others will keep walking. Others will set priorities. Others will negotiate interests. Others will draft rules. And perhaps tomorrow, those who chose to stay on the sidelines will have to deal with a reality built without their input. That is why participation is also a form of sovereignty. To participate is to attempt to steer our own destiny. And perhaps this is the main conclusion of our experiment. In the first chapter, we identified points of convergence. In this second chapter, we put them to the test. We listened to those demanding security. We listened to those demanding sovereignty. And we discovered that one need not destroy the other. Cooperation requires capacity. Capacity requires rules. Rules require participation. Participation generates representation. Representation can generate checks and balances, and checks and balances can help us protect both our security and our sovereignty. That is where our proposal not only survived the debate, an opportunity has emerged. The opportunity for the shield, which has already begun its journey, to expand through participation and evolve based on the family of principles we discovered in our research. Will it one day become the great shield of the Americas? We do not know yet. That will be determined by the process and its results. But from the perspective of Stoic geopolitics, we can recognize one thing. There is an opportunity to participate in its construction, an opportunity for the peoples of the Americas not to be mere spectators of a new realignment, but active participants in their own history. And historical opportunities have a particular characteristic. They do not wait forever. If we do not take our place, others will. If we do not help shape the rules, others will shape them. We cannot do everything at once, but we can begin, and the more of us there are on this journey, the greater our chances of building the path together. I am Carlos Alberto, the thinker. Thank you for joining me once again in this thought laboratory. Now, I want to hear your opinion. Is it better to participate by collaborating on the construction of a great shield of the Americas, its rules and its checks and balances, or to remain on the sidelines and let others build them? Comment. Ask, question. Because we too, by thinking and participating, begin to become part of our own history. Our research continues, the pendulum is swinging again, and we will keep watching for the opportunities it leaves in its wake, because we cannot build everything at once. But we can start walking, and the path is made by walking. Until next time, friends, see you at the next release. To think well is to live better.